The General Social Survey, a massive national poll conducted by the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, has been measuring public confidence in institutions for more than 3 decades. In the late 1980s, ratings for the press began to slip, and by the 1990s, the slip had become a slide. In 1990, 74% of Americans said they had a great deal or some confidence in the press. A decade later, that number had fallen to 58%. During the same period, confidence in other institutions remained stable. In 1985, just 16% of the public gave low credibility ratings to their daily newspaper. By 2004, that number had nearly tripled to 45%. In 1985, Americans overwhelmingly viewed the press as moral rather than immoral, by 54% to 13%. By 2003, the percentage who called the press immoral had nearly tripled to 32%, though a plurality, 45%, still viewed it as moral. In 2003, 54% felt that press criticism of political leaders keeps political leaders from doing things that should not be done. 29% think that such criticism impedes political leaders from doing their jobs. That represents an improvement from the late 1990s when the public expressed its anger about coverage of President Clinton's impeachment.
Media credibility and trust have been shrinking for years, even though we have more reporting, blogging, tweeting, and opinion than ever before. Why is credibility shrinking?
I think before we look at why credibility is shrinking, we have to look at where the symptom is coming from. And so I really like that the question pointed out that we have more media than ever before. We have tweeting, we have blogging, we have online broadcasts, we have your regular television news broadcasts as well, with print still hanging on for dear life. And what I see is a lot of overflow media in which people are being given options to pick a viewpoint. And so the credibility issue, I believe according to its original definition, is simply being perceived as trustworthy. We have sources that are becoming decidedly editorial. And with the editorials, we find ourselves aligning ourselves with specific political views, political parties, socioeconomic views. You don't have to be a social constructivist to think this way. It just is. You're providing everyone with a basis for their own opinion. And so you're going to have a lot of dissonance in the market on what is considered credible. And so someone who, say, watches The Blaze is not going to find CNN credible. Someone who watches CNN is not going to find someplace like Red Alert Politics credible. And so with all of this dissonance, you're finding people selecting the sources that they want, which creates a lot of, well, like I said, dissonance. And therefore, I think we're seeing a perception of decline in media credibility when maybe in reality, before, when we didn't have all of this technology available to us, the cultural diversities weren't expressed quite as much, and therefore sources were perceived as more credible because people were only ever getting one streamlined point of view at any given time. There was no counter option.
PolitiFact rated 32% of Republican claims as false or pants on fire, compared to 11% of Democratic claims, a 3-to-1 margin. Conversely, PolitiFact rated 22% of Democratic claims as entirely true, compared to 11% of Republican claims, a 2-to-1 margin. A majority of Democratic statements, 54%, were rated as mostly or entirely true, compared to only 18% of Republican statements. Conversely, a majority of Republican statements, 52%, were rated as mostly or entirely false, compared to 24% of Democratic statements.
But people aren't necessarily interested in dispelling poor reporting. They seem to be more interested in helping journalism survive as a medium, or media. I don't think we can even say journalism, they're trying to make journalism survive. I don't think we can say that. I think they're trying to help media survive, whatever that takes. And I think in a way that continues to erode its credibility rather than build it up.